The Sound Machine is a chapter written by Roald Dahl. Now, ironically, for you people, Roald Dahl is the same author or poet who had spoken against a machine. If you remember your class 10 syllabus, you had a poem called Television,
Television.
and Roald Dahl was the poet, and he spoke against machine, right? He spoke against the use of television. And ironically, this is a science fiction uh, story, and here he talks about machines. However, in the end, we will find out that Roald Dahl is also trying to suggest that machines cannot make us conquer nature. One more thing which I was discussing last day, that when we were discussing science fiction books. So just in case you are unable to figure out any science fiction book, हालांकि मैंने फिलहाल तुम लोग को लिखा दिया है around the world in 80 days, but this is an example which you could have quoted that day. Science fiction story or a book. So something like this you must have done even in your previous classes, maybe class 7, class 8, class 9. So always, in case you get a book review of a kind of a genre that you do not, that we haven't discussed, you can always try to borrow something from your own syllabus, the current syllabus or the past syllabus. ऐसा पॉसिबल नहीं है कि तुम लोग हर तरह का स्टोरी आज तक नहीं पढ़े हो. It is pretty much impossible. So for example, if you get a topic that write a book review on a children's story or of a children's book, to think of a children's book or a children's story that you might have read in class 8 or class 9 or class 6 7, and just write about that. Anyway, The Sound Machine by Roald Dahl. uh, okay, read the first paragraph, first two paragraphs. Rida, you read the first two paragraphs loudly.
It was a warm summer evening, and Klausner walked quickly through the front gate and around the side of the house and into the garden at the back. He went on down the garden until he came to a wooden shed, and he unlocked the door, went inside, and closed the door behind him. The interior of the shed was an unpainted room. Against one wall, on the left, there was a long wooden workbench, and on it, among a littering of wires and batteries and small sharp tools, there stood a black box about 3 feet long, the shape of a child's coffin.
Now, what happens here is that Klausner is a scientist, but he is not a very famous or a popular scientist. He's a he's pretty young, and he is someone who is interested in science, and he conducts a variety of experiments in his own workshop, which is in the outhouse in his garden. So here we find that Klausner is walking out from his house into the garden, where he has a small workshop or a shed, जहाँ पे एक workbench है, and there are wires and batteries, and there is an object which is a rectangular black box, like the shape of a child's coffin. So ये जो black box है, like the shape of a coffin of a child, this is a machine which he is working on. इस machine से Klausner will be able to hear all the sounds that are inaccessible or inaudible to the normal human ear. Like as a human being, we can hear sounds from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. जैसे कि हम लोग अल्ट्रासोनिक साउंड नहीं सुन सकते, which can be heard by dogs or dolphins or bats. Similarly, we cannot hear sounds which are too low in frequency, which are lower than 20 hertz in frequency. So this sound machine will help Klausner to hear all those millions of sounds which are happening around us, the sounds which are emanating around us, but which we are unable to uh, catch. Okay, तो ये स्टोरी थोड़ा स्लो है and I will therefore read a bit fast, uh, giving you a basic summary of the passages. Read the next paragraph.
Klausner moved across the room to the box. The top of the box was open, and he bent down and began to poke and peer inside it among a mass of different colored wires and silver tubes. He picked up a piece of paper that lay beside the box, studied it carefully, put it down, peered inside the box, and started running his fingers along the wires, tugging gently or at them to test the connections, glancing back at the paper, then into the box, then at the paper again, checking each wire. He did this for perhaps an hour.
Now, what does this mean? This tells us that he was somebody who was very devoted to his work. He was constantly working on the box, tugging at the wires, checking the connection, और बार बार वो एक पेपर से रेफर कर करके काम कर रहा था. So he was looking at the paper and then he was again looking into the box, then back to the paper and then again inside the box. And he kept doing it non-stop for around 1 hour, which means that he was not somebody who got distracted. He could work non-stop without getting distracted or without getting exhausted. So these things tell us that he was someone who was hardworking, he was dedicated to his work, and he could work with concentration for an extended period of time. Okay. So right now, like I said, he is working on a machine which will eventually be called the sound machine. Okay, continue then.
Then he
Next
put
paragraph.
a hand around to the front of the box where there were three dials, and he began to twiddle them, watching at the same time the movement of the mechanism inside the box. All the while he kept speaking softly to himself, nodding his head, smiling sometimes, his hands always moving, the fingers moving swiftly, deftly inside the box, his mouth twisting into curious shapes when a thing was delicate or difficult to do, saying, "Yes, yes, and now this one. Yes, yes, but is this right? Is it? Where's my diagram? Ah,
So
yes,
what
of
happens
course."
here? Is this clear? तो ये just अपने आप खुद से बात कर रहा है. He is twiddling and twisting the dial, जो भी एक machine के parts हैं, and he is trying to convince himself that हाँ हाँ अब हो जाएगा. Where is my diagram? So he is talking to himself. Again, a very particular character of a scientist. They often talk to themselves. Continue. Page 100.
Ah, yes, of course. Yes, yes, that's right. And now, good, good, yes, yes, yes. His concentration was intense. His movements were quick. There was an air of urgency about the way he worked, of breathlessness, of strong, suppressed excitement.
Now, underline this, strong suppressed excitement. Now, this tells us that he is thrilled about something. There is a layer of excitement inside him, which he is trying to suppress or control. Okay, suppressed means controlled. वो अंदर ही अंदर excited है, क्योंकि he is on the verge of a new discovery, a new invention. Okay, he is just like one step away from a major invention. That is why he is very excited. He is only one step away, maybe a few minutes away from a major invention. Clear? Read a bit more.
Suddenly, he heard footsteps on the gravel path outside, and he straightened and turned swiftly as the door opened, and a tall man came in. It was Scott. It was only Scott, the doctor. Well, 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 the doctor said. So this is where you hide yourself in the evenings? Hello, Scott, Klausner said. I happened to be passing. the doctor told him. So I dropped in to see how you were. There was no one in the house, so I came on down here. How's that throat of yours been behaving? It's all right. It's fine. Now I am here. I might as well have a look at it. Please don't trouble. I'm quite cured. I'm fine.
Okay, wait. So somebody comes, Klausner looks up. It is Dr. Scott, who is like his friend. Okay, Dr. Scott is not just a doctor, but he is a sort of Klausner's friend. So the doctor said कि मैं यहाँ से पास हो रहा था, तो I thought कि मैं एक बार देख लूं कि तुम्हारा throat कैसा है. तो Klausner says कि I am fine. Then doctor says कि अब मैं जब आ ही गया हूं, तो let me take a look at it. And Klausner says नहीं नहीं रहने दो, don't take trouble, I am cured. So this also tells us that Klausner is so busy in his work and so excited about the invention that right now he does not want the doctor to inspect his throat. Normally, as you know, that scientists pay very little attention to their own sustenance. We have read so many stories about scientists जिनको अपने बारे में याद नहीं रहता. They often miss their lunch and dinners. Understood? They do not look after their own selves because they are so engrossed in their work. So Klausner here does not give any kind of importance to his own throat, because at this moment he only wants to talk about or think about that sound machine which he has invented. Okay. Sashank, you read the next part. The doctor began to feel the tension from here.
The doctor began to feel the tension in the room. He locked all the black box on the bench. Then he looked at the man. You have got your hat on, he said. Oh, have I? Clonzer reached up, removed the hat, and put it on the bench. The doctor came up closer and bent down to look into the box. What's this? He said, making a radio. No, just fooling around. It's got rather complicated looking innards. Yes, Clonzer seemed tense and distracted. What is it? The doctor asked. It's rather a frightening looking thing, isn't it?
Okay,
It's
stop.
just an idea.
1 minute. तो डॉक्टर ने उसे कहा कि तुम अपना हैट उतारे नहीं, हैट पहन के खड़े हो. तो क्लॉजनर सेज ओ हैव आई. अब ये बाहर का टेंडेंसी है, बाहर के कंट्रीज का, स्पेशली पहले के जमाने में ज्यादा था कि जब कोई घर से बाहर निकलता था तो अ जेंटलमैन वाज सपोज्ड टू ऑलवेज वेयर अ हैट. विदाउट अ हैट दे वुड नेवर लीव देयर हाउस. लाइक सपोज अगर तुम अपने फ्रेंड के घर जा रहे हो तो यू विल वेयर अ हैट, go out, and the moment you enter the house you will take off your hat. That is why हर घर में एक hat stand होता है. हम लोग जो स्टोरी पढ़े थे अभी सिंगिंग लेसन, उसमें भी इफ यू रिमेंबर कि जो बेजिल था, बेजिल हैड परचेस्ड दैट हैट स्टैंड. अंडरस्टूड? जैसे हम लोग जूता पहन के जाते हैं और घर पहुंच के जूता खोल देते हैं, तो वैसे ही हैट पहन के और फिर हैट खोल देता है. लेकिन क्लॉजनर हैट खोलना भूल गया है. मतलब वो ही इज सो एंगेज्ड और एंड engrossed in his work that he does not even realize that he is still having his hat on. So when the doctor says that you have got your hat on, he takes it off. The doctor, who is very indifferent to such inventions, the doctor says ki, are you making a radio? Because it has got very complicated looking inard. Okay, inard means the inner parts. Now Klausner is a bit tense, he is distracted, and we also get to understand that the doctor, he is a man of medical science, but he has no idea and no interest in physics or chemistry. So as the story progresses, we will find that doctor is an indifferent character. जब क्लॉजनर उसको बोलेगा चिल्लाते हुए कि मैंने अब ऐसा मशीन इन्वेंट किया है कि मैं कोई भी आवाज सुन सकता हूं, तो डॉक्टर will hardly take any interest, and therefore the doctor symbolizes all the types of people in the world who are indifferent characters. मतलब उन्हें कोई फर्क ही नहीं पड़ता अगर कोई मेजर ब्रेक थ्रू इन्वेंशन या डिस्कवरी हो. So the doctor says, what is it? It is rather a frightening looking instrument, a frightening looking thing, isn't it? Go to page number 101. Sashank, continue.
It's just an idea. Yes, it has to do with sound, that's all. Good heavens, man, don't you get enough of that sort of thing all day in your work? I like sound. So it seems the doctor went to the door, turned, and said, well, I don't disturb you. Glad your throat's not worrying you anymore. But he kept standing there, looking at the box, intrigued by
Intrigued.
the remark.
Intrigued माने puzzled. इसका मतलब लिख लो. Intrigued means puzzled and confused.
Intrigued by the remarkable complexity of its inside, curious to know what the strange patient of his was up to. What it's really for, he asked. You have made me inquisitive.
Inquisitive. Inquisitive मतलब लिख लो curious. 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 So doctor is about to leave, and then the doctor once again turns back and says that you have made me curious. What is this actually? Before that, Klausner says that it has got something to do with sound. And the doctor, who is a very indifferent kind of a character, he says, oh my God, you need more sound. Aren't you getting enough sound throughout the day? So the doctor is a practical man, a man of practical reality, a man who is indifferent and does not have any vision of future. He is not thinking of possibilities. Klausner, on the other hand, is a scientist, and he thinks of all the possibilities which might happen because of an invention. And we also find that Klausner is hesitant to tell the doctor. He simply says कि it has got to do with sound. Klausner डिटेल में बताना नहीं चाह रहा, क्योंकि Klausner को लगता है कि doctor is not the right person who will take interest in his work. Secondly, Klausner does not know whether the instrument will really work or not. Okay. All right, Sashank, continue then.
Lonzo looked down at the box, then at the doctor, and he reached up and began gently to scratch the lobe of his right ear. There was a pause. The doctor stood by the door, waiting, smiling. All right, I will tell you if you are interested. There was another pause, and the doctor could see that Lonzo was having trouble about how to begin. He was shifting from one foot to other, tugging at the lobe of his ear, looking at his feet, and then at last slowly he said, well, it's like this. The theory is very simple, really. The human ear. You know that it can't hear anything. There are sounds that are so low pitched or so high pitched that it can't hear them. Yes, the doctor said yes. Well, speaking very roughly, any note so high that it has more than 15,000 vibrations a second, we can't hear it. Dogs have better ears than us. You know, you can buy a whistle whose note is so high pitched that you can't hear it at all, but a dog can hear it. Yes, I
Actually
have
पता
seen
है
one, the doctor said.
ये लाइन पढ़ के मैंने अमेजन में सर्च भी किया था इसको. तुम अगर कहीं सर्च करोगे नेट पे, पता नहीं अवेलेबल है कि नहीं, बट इसको हाई पिच्ड विसल बोलते हैं. मतलब एक ऐसा विसल, तुम अगर उस विसल को बजाओगे, मतलब वो सीटी को बजाओगे, तो उसका वॉइस तुम नहीं सुन पाओगे, लेकिन एक डॉग सुन पाएगा या कोई दूसरा एनिमल सुन पाएगा. तो वैसा विसल सच में होता है, यू नो, जिसका आवाज तुम सुन नहीं पा रहे हो, जबकि तुम ही उस विसल को ब्लो कर रहे हो. So here Klausner also says that there are sounds, for example, the sound of a high-pitched whistle that we cannot hear, but other animals can hear. क्योंकि हम लोग का जो ह्यूमन रेंज है वो 20,000 वाइब्रेशंस तक ही है. लेकिन वो अपर लिमिट है ह्यूमन रेंज का. जो एवरेज ह्यूमन है वो 15,000 के बियॉन्ड नहीं सुन सकता. उससे ज्यादा एक एवरेज ह्यूमन नहीं सुन सकता है. लेकिन 15,000 से ज्यादा या 20,000 से ज्यादा, देयर कैन बी सो मेनी वाइब्रेशंस. एंड सो ही बिगिंस to give the demonstration of the machine to the doctor. लेकिन डॉक्टर का रिएक्शन से you will understand that the doctor is not that interested. He will not be thrilled at the idea. He will feel like, okay, fine, बना लो इसको. Okay, continue.
Of course you have, and up the scale, higher than the note of that whistle. There is another note, a vibration if you like, but I prefer to think of it as a note. You can't hear that one either. And above that, there is another and another rising right up the scale forever and ever and ever, an endless succession of notes and infinity of notes. There is a note, if only our ears could hear it, so high that it vibrates a million times a second, and another a million times as high as that, and on, higher and higher, as far as numbers goes, which is infinity, eternity beyond the stars.
Now
Clonzer
you think,
was
ये समझ गए point. Like if I say कि 15,000 vibrations तक हम लोग का कान ह्यूमन ईयर सुन सकता है. अब 15,000 के ऊपर कितने नंबर्स होते हैं? देयर कैन बी सम साउंड्स जिसका वाइब्रेशन है 1 लाख, किसी का 10 लाख, किसी का 500 lakh. So the numbers can go up to eternity, infinity, which means there can be infinite sounds which are all happening around us, but we cannot hear. So this is a strange and a marvelous possibility. All right. यहां तक सबको क्लियर समझ में आ रहा है? कनिष्क,
तो इस साउंड का बात कौन बोल रहा है?
क्लॉजनर समझा रहा है.
ठीक है.
Okay, carry on, Shashank. Next para.
Lonza was becoming more animated every moment. He was a small, frail man, nervous and twitchy, with always moving hands, his large head inclined towards his left shoulder, as though his neck were not quite strong enough to support it rigidly. His face was smooth and pale, almost white, and the pale grey eyes that blinked and peered from behind a pair of steel spectacles were bewildered, unfocused, remote. He was a frail, nervous, twitchy little man, a mouth of a man, dreamy and distracted, suddenly fluttering and animated. And now the doctor, looking at that strange pale face and those pale grey eyes, felt that somehow there was about this little person a quality of distance, of immense, immeasurable distance, and as though the mind were far away from where the body was.
ओके
The
ये पैरा
doctor
मेरे को एरो देके लिख लो. ये पैरा के पास एरो देके लिख लो. फिजिकल डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ क्लॉजनर. Physical description of Klausner. Like in this para, we get to see how Klausner appears. He is not a tall, broad man. He is actually very weak, very small, and very twitchy. Twitchy माने unsteady, जिसके हाथ पैर कांपते हो. मतलब ये nervous चूहा जैसा है. He is like very nervous type of a person. He is not very firm, very bold, very determined. He looks like his hands are always twitching. He is always nervous. एक ग्लास गिरा दो तो वो डर के भाग जाएगा. So he looks very much like that. And right now, he is looking like a nervous little man who is bursting with excitement. And the doctor also can see in his eyes the look of a man who is physically here, but mentally somewhere else. वो अपने सोच में इतना डूबा हुआ है that उसको देख के ऐसा लग रहा है that he is physically here, but his soul or his mind is at an immeasurable distance away. His mind and body are at two different places. Okay. So if the question comes, because you are going to get short questions this time, so like give the general description of Klausner, then you will focus on this paragraph. Read the next para, Shashank.
The doctor waited for him to go on. Clonzer sighed and clasped his hands tightly together. I believe, he said, speaking more slowly now, that there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear. It is possible that up there in those high pitched, inaudible regions, there is a new, exciting music being made with subtle harmonies and fierce grinding discords. A music so powerful that it would drive us mad if only our ears were turned to hear the sound of it. There may be anything, for
tuned
all we know, there may.
ट्यून्ड है वो, टर्न्ड नहीं. अच्छा, सटल, सटल का मतलब लिखो सॉफ्ट. सटल मतलब लाइक नॉट लाउड बट सॉफ्ट हार्मनी. और डिस्कॉर्ड मतलब अनप्लेजेंट साउंड. लाइक थर्ड लास्ट लाइन, डिस्कॉर्ड इज अनप्लेजेंट साउंड. ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट और एक्साइटिंग पैराग्राफ है. क्लॉजनर कह रहा है कि देयर इज अ होल वर्ल्ड ऑफ साउंड आउट देयर व्हिच वी कैन नॉट हियर. वी कैन ओनली हियर अ लिमिटेड रेंज ऑफ साउंड. परहैप्स हम लोग शायद सिर्फ 1% या 2% साउंड सुन सकते हैं. जैसे यूनिवर्स का बात होता है कि हम लोग यूनिवर्स का सिर्फ 1 या 2% हिस्सा ही जानते हैं. हम लोग जितना जानते हैं उससे कहीं ज्यादा हम लोग नहीं जानते. इतना बड़ा है यूनिवर्स. यहां पे क्लॉजनर इज टॉकिंग अबाउट द यूनिवर्स ऑफ साउंड, दैट द यूनिवर्स ऑफ साउंड इज प्रोबेबली सो बिग दैट व्हाट वी नो is much less than what we don't know. शायद, perhaps, there are the kinds of sounds which are so beautiful or so unpleasant कि जो उसको सुन ले वो पागल हो जाए, like literally पागल हो जाए. Perhaps there are such uh, a few sounds which are so harmonious or so grinding. ग्राइंडिंग समझते हो? अगर सपोज हम कुछ इसको रगड़ें, तुम एक अपने नाखून से, यू नो व्हाट्स द कार्टून, जिसमें एक पैकेट में कार्टून को रगड़ो नाखून से, तो जो नॉइज आएगा ना, ग्राइंडिंग नॉइज है वो. तो वो नॉइज कैसा लगता है? वो सुन के लगता है ना कि लाइक यू वांट टू लाइक टीयर इट अपार्ट. तो दैट इज द काइंड ऑफ साउंड ही इज सेइंग, दैट some grinding sounds will probably be so discordant, so unpleasant, that it will drive us mad if our ears could hear it. Okay? तो ये काफी इंटरेस्टिंग ऑब्जर्वेशन एक्चुअली है, क्योंकि ऐसा सच में हो सकता है. अच्छा, अमन, यू रीड नेक्स्ट. यस द डॉक्टर, यहां से.
Yes, the doctor said, but it's not very probable. Why not? Why not? Klosner pointed to a fly sitting on a small rod of copper wire on the workbench. You see that fly? What sort of a noise is that fly making now? None that one can hear. But for all we know, the creature may be whistling like mad on a very high note, or barking, or croaking, or singing a song. It's got a mouth, hasn't it? It's got a throat. The
तो
doctor
यहाँ
looked
पे
at
क्लॉजनर सेज दैट ये जो फ्लाई यहाँ पे देख रहे हो, फ्लाई मींस मॉस्किटो, मे बी एट दिस पॉइंट दिस फ्लाई इज बार्किंग और क्रोकिंग, जो हमें सुनाई नहीं दे रहा. अब तुम देखना कि जो डॉक्टर का रिएक्शन है वो एक बहुत ही इनडिफरेंट सा रिएक्शन है. डॉक्टर विल थिंक दैट अच्छा, ओ ओके. डॉक्टर कुछ इंटरेस्ट नहीं दिखाएगा. डॉक्टर को क्लॉजनर का बात डॉक्टर को कोई उसके बात में इंटरेस्ट नहीं आ रहा, बिकॉज ही लैक्स इमेजिनेशन. He has limited knowledge of medical science, but he does not have the imagination or the vision of a scientist. That's why doctor says कि ये सब बोलने में अच्छा लगता है, but it is not probable. ऐसा हो नहीं सकता. जैसे अगर एक साइंटिस्ट तुमको बोले कि दुनिया में इतने सारे स्टार्स हैं, यूनिवर्स में इतने सारे प्लैनेट्स हैं कि शायद हम जैसे लोग हजारों प्लैनेट्स में रह रहे हो, तो जो स्केप्टिक इंसान है वो बोलेगा कि अच्छा, सुनने में अच्छा लगता है ये स्टोरी, लेकिन ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. वी आर द ओनली ह्यूमंस अलाइव. तो skeptic will always say that ये सब possible ही नहीं है, because उसका narrow vision है. So the doctor here, Dr. Scott, is the epitome or the symbol of a narrow-minded person who has limited knowledge and he has no interest beyond his medical science. Okay? And please note that इस स्टोरी में दो ही मेन कैरेक्टर्स हैं. एक है क्लॉजनर, who is a man with vision and broad-mindedness, and his friend Dr. Scott is a person of the other extreme kind. एक तरह से यहाँ पे ये भी दिखाया जा रहा है कि वर्ल्ड में दो तरह के लोग होते हैं, एक क्लॉजनर की तरह और एक डॉक्टर स्कॉट की तरह. ठीक है? Sorry to interrupt you. Continue, Aman.
The doctor looked at the fly and he smiled. He was still standing by the door with his hand on the doorknob. Well, he said, so you're going to check up on that? Some time ago, Klosner said, I made a simple instrument and proved to me that the existence of many odd inaudible sounds. Often I have sat and watched the needle of my instrument recording the presence of sound vibrations in the air when I myself could hear nothing. And those are the sounds I want to listen to. I want to know where they come from and who or what is making them. And the machine on the table there, the doctor said, is that going to allow you to hear these noises? It may, who knows? So far, I have had no luck, but I have made some changes in it, and tonight I am ready for another trial. This machine, he said, touching it with his hands, is designed to pick up sound vibrations that are too high pitched for reception by the human ear and to convert them to a scale of audible tones. I tune it in almost like a radio.
Okay, now what is happening here is that Klosner says that I had made a simple instrument which proved to me that there are other sounds that exist. मैंने कुछ टाइम पहले, लाइक कुछ दिन पहले या कुछ महीनों पहले एक इंस्ट्रूमेंट बनाया था, और आफ्टर द सक्सेस ऑफ दैट एक्सपेरिमेंट अब मैंने उस इंस्ट्रूमेंट को मॉडिफाई किया है. नाउ आई एम मेकिंग इट इनटू अ फुल फ्लेजेड मशीन. उस इंस्ट्रूमेंट को मॉडिफाई करके आई एम टर्निंग इट इनटू अ प्रॉपर मशीन, एंड टुडे आई एम रेडी फॉर अनदर ट्रायल. एंड ही सेज कि इसका जो फॉर्मूला है वो क्या है. देखो, हम लोग का तो ह्यूमन ईयर है, वी ऑब्वियसली कैन नॉट हियर एनी साउंड विच इज ऑफ हायर वाइब्रेशन. ये मशीन क्या करेगा, ये मशीन कन्वर्ट कर देगा. मतलब अगर कोई साउंड सपोज 1 लाख वाइब्रेशंस का है, तो ये मशीन उस 1 लाख वाइब्रेशन को हमारे रेंज में कन्वर्ट कर देगा. समझ में आ रहा है? ये कन्वर्ट कर देगा उसको, जैसे कि कंप्यूटर सॉफ्टवेयर करता है, वो लैंग्वेज में कन्वर्ट करता है ना, वो हाई डेफिनेशन लैंग्वेज टू लो डेफिनेशन लैंग्वेज एंड वाइस वर्सा. तो ये लैंग्वेज को कन्वर्ट कर देगा सो दैट वी विल बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड और हियर दैट साउंड. इज दिस क्लियर? एंड आई कैन ट्यून इट लाइक अ रेडियो. जैसे रेडियो में तुम लोग अगर पहले के जमाने का रेडियो देखे हो, रेडियो में नॉब होता है, तुम उसको घुमाते जाओ तो वो स्टेशन चेंज होता जाता है उसका 9900, वो चेंज होता जाता है. तो यहां भी वैसे ही हो रहा है. तो यहां भी वैसे ही हो रहा है. यहाँ पे वो उसको मशीन को ट्यून करता जाएगा, and according to the frequency he will be able to catch the sound at that frequency. Like अगर वो उसको 50,000 में ले गया, तो he will be able to catch the sound of 50,000 hertz and so on. Okay, continue, Aman.
How do you mean? It isn't complicated. Say I wish to listen to the squeak of a bat. That's a fairly high pitched sound, about 30,000 vibrations a second. The average human ear can't quite hear it. Now, if there were a flying bat around this room and I tuned in to 30,000 on my machine, I would hear the squeaking of that bat very clearly. I would even hear the correct note, F sharp or B flat or whatever it might be. but merely a much lower pitch. Don't you understand? The doctor looked at the long black coffin box. And you're going to try it tonight? Yes.
So Klausner says that you will also be able to hear the correct note, F और B. नोट तुम्हारे जैसे पियानो में होते हैं ना, पियानो के स्केल्स में जैसे सारे गामा पा जो है वो अलग अलग नोट्स है. अगर तुम लोग किसी को कीबोर्ड या पियानो आता है तो उसमें नोट्स होते हैं ना, ए से लेके जी तक, सी से लेके जी तक सर, सी डी, हाँ सी डी ई एफ जी एंड देन ए बी, तो इसको नोट्स बोलते हैं. और शार्प और फ्लैट नोट इज द वाइट एंड द ब्लैक की. तो हर साउंड का एक नोट होता है और एक पिच होता है. तो ही सेइंग कि हम लोग उसी साउंड को उसी नोट के साथ सुन पाएंगे. नोट का मतलब है आवाज में कितना मिठास है या कितना कड़वाहट है. समझ गए? अगर कोई मीठा आवाज है तो वो फ्लैटर होगा या शार्पर होगा, सॉरी. और अगर वो थोड़ा सा हैवी आवाज है तो वो लाउड फ्लैट होगा. लेकिन उसका पिच चेंज हो जाएगा और वो हमारे रेंज में आ जाएगा. सो कंटिन्यू, पेज 104.
Well, I wish you luck. He glanced at his watch. My goodness, he said. I must fly. Goodbye, and thank you for telling me. I must call again sometime and find out what happened. The doctor went out and closed the door behind him.
This also tells us that the doctor is so indifferent and so disinterested in the job. He just looks at his watch and he says, oh my god, I have to go now. So इसको ये सुन के कोई इंटरेस्ट ही नहीं आया. He did not stop there to watch him conduct the experiment. Okay. Acha, anybody any questions so far? Lavanya, Rahul, Krish,
No, sir.
all clear?
No, sir.
Okay, Aman, continue. Next para.
For a while longer, Losner fussed about with the wires in the black box. Then he straightened up and in a soft, excited whisper said, "Now we'll try again. We'll take it out into the garden this time, and then perhaps, the reception will be better. Lift it up now, carefully. Oh my God, it's heavy." He carried the box to the door, found that he couldn't open the door without putting it down, carried it back, put it on the bench, opened the door, and then carried it with some difficulty into the garden. He placed the box carefully on a small wooden table that stood on the lawn. He returned to the shed and fetched a pair of earphones. He plugged the wire connections from the earphones into the machine and put the earphones over his ears. The movements of his hands were quick and precise. He was excited and breathed loudly and quickly through his mouth. He kept on talking to himself with little words of comfort and encouragement, as though he were afraid that the machine might not work, and afraid also of what might happen if it did.
ये बहुत अच्छा लाइन है. It's a very beautiful line. As a writer, you can understand this. That उसका जो वो नर्वस दोनों तरह से है कि अगर ये नहीं चला मशीन तो क्या होगा. दैट विल ब्रिंग इन अ हेल लॉट ऑफ ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डिसअपॉइंटमेंट. और अगर ये मशीन काम कर गया, then also he's afraid of the secrets he might unfold. Understood? Because he will be the first human on the planet, the first human to be born who can access these secrets which have been guarded by nature. तो वो अफ्रेड है दोनों तरह से. और वो मशीन को गार्डन में लेके जाता है क्योंकि वहां पे रिसेप्शन स्ट्रांग होगा, वहां पे नेटवर्क अच्छा मिलेगा उसको. That is why. Okay, read one more para, Aman. Next para.
He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an ancient, consumptive, bespectacled child. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden, and then was a woman, and there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. Then he turned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved the needle across a large center dial, like the wavelength dial of a radio. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands, starting at 15,000 and going on up to 110 lakhs. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense listening attitude. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle
अच्छा एक बार यहाँ पे देखो, कंजम्पटिव का मतलब लिखो. कंजम्पटिव मीन्स अ डिजीज्ड चाइल्ड, जिसको कोई डिजीज हुआ है. तो कंजम्पटिव मीन्स डिजीज्ड एंड बी स्पेक्टिकल्ड मीन्स वन हु इज वेयरिंग स्पेक्टिकल्स. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. This is page number 104. From what? From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved a needle across a large central dial, like the wavelength dial of a radio. The dial was marked with many numbers, a series of bands starting at 15,000 and going up to 1 lakh. 1 lakh nahi hai, 1 million. So these are the range where he has sort of the vibrations. Okay, Aman, continue to read from here. And now he was bending forward.
And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense listening attitude. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, so slowly that he could hardly see it move. And in the earphones, he could hear a faint, spasmodic
Spasmodic
crackling.
Spasmodic means, write down, brief and irregular. Brief and irregular. Brief
किसका
and
मतलब?
spasmodic. Continue.
Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself. But that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up toward a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears have never been before and had no right to be.
He's feeling
And
that
he
उसके ears एक ऐसे जगह पे जा रहे हैं जहाँ पे कभी कोई human ear नहीं गया. So here the author is adding a bit of a drama. Okay, continue.
The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek, a frightful, piercing shriek, and he jumped and dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one inside except the woman in the garden next door, and it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality that he had never heard before. Klausner looked around him, searching instinctively for the source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing in sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand, and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. Again, he heard the scream. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket with the roses, and turned to walk away. Mrs. Saunders, Klausner shouted, his voice shrill with excitement. Oh, Mrs. Saunders.
Now what happened is that Mrs. Saunders is the next door neighbor, and when the woman was cutting the rose stem, तो उसको एक आवाज सुनाई दिया, a very different kind of a sound, a metallic kind of a sound, जैसे कोई चिल्ला रहा है. And he suddenly realizes that this sound is the scream or the cry of pain of the rose stem. Next page, Lavanya, you read. Page 106.
And looking round, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn, a fantastic arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. Cut another one, please cut another one quickly. She stood still, staring at him. Why, Mr. Klausner, she said, what's the matter? Please do as I asked, he said. Cut just one more rose. Mrs. Saunders had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. She wondered whether should run into the house and fetch her husband. No, she thought. No, he's harmless. I'll just humor him. Certainly, Mr. Klausner, if you like, she said. She took her scissors from the basket, bent down, and snipped another rose. Again Klausner heard that frightful throatless shriek in the earphones. Again it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said, that's enough. No more, please, no more. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers to the other, looking at him. I'm going to tell you something, Mrs. Saunders, he said. Something that you won't believe. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her intently through his thick spectacles. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Saunders? No, she said. I certainly did. I certainly didn't know that. It happens to be true, he said. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. I heard them shrieking each time you cut one. I heard the cry of pain, a very high pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibrations a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. Did you really, Mr. Krosno? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You'd be right. It hasn't. Not like ours anyway. But how do you know, Mrs. Saunders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. How do you know that the rose bush uh, doesn't feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrist off with a garden shears? How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it?
Now
Yes,
here,
Mr.
Klausner is telling her that how do you know that a rose bush cannot feel the pain? Because biologically it is a plant and it is alive. So it definitely feels the pain. And I heard the sound even though you could not. Now, obviously, Mrs. Saunders thinks that Klausner is a madman and he is talking all rubbish. And therefore, she is just trying to humor him. She is just agreeing with him, but she wants to get back to her house quickly. Okay, so this also tells us that he is not somebody, he is considered to be a sort of a crazy kind of a person by other people, by his own neighbors. Yes, carry on.
Yes, Mr. Klausner. Oh, yes, and good night. Quickly she turned and ran up the garden to her house. Klausner went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between thumb and forefinger and slowly pulled it upward and sideways until the stem broke. From the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones a faint, high-pitched cry. Uh, Curiously inanimate, he took another daisy and did it again. Once more he heard the cry, but he wasn't so sure now that it expressed pain. No, it wasn't pain, it was surprise. Or was it? It didn't really express any of the feelings or emotions known to a human being. It was just a cry, a neutral, stony cry, a single emotionless note expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably didn't feel pain. It felt something else which we didn't know about, something called toin or spoil or plinuncument or anything you like.
So Klausner is thinking when he repeated the experiment in his own garden, he feels that probably it is not a cry of pain. Probably it is a cry of surprise because it is the kind of a sound that I have never heard before. And then he thinks that probably it is a different emotion. It is an emotion which humans are not familiar with. It probably iska naam kuch aur hai. Probably it is a toin or a spurl. Now toin spurls koi real words nahi hai, but he is creating these words to say that this is a new emotion which only flowers experience, but we do not. Go to page number 108. Page number 108. Lavanya, continue a bit more.
He stood up and removed the earphones. It was getting dark, and he could see pricks of light shining in the windows of the houses all around him. Carefully, he picked up the black box from the table, carried it into the shed, and put it on the workbench. Then he went out, locked the door behind him, and walked up to the house. The next morning, Klausner was up as soon as it was light. He dressed and went straight to the shed. He picked up the machine and carried it outside, clasping it to his chest with both hands, walking unsteadily under its weight. He went past the house, out through the front gate, and across the road to the park. There he paused and looked around him. Then he went on until he came to a large tree, a beech tree, and he placed the machine on the ground close to the trunk of the tree. Quickly, he went back to the house and bought an axe from the coal cellar and carried it across the road into the park. He put the axe on the ground beside the tree. Then he looked around him again, peering nervously through his thick glasses in every direction. There was no one about. It was 6 in the morning.
Now at 6 o'clock in the morning, he picks up an axe and goes to a park nearby to try and repeat the experiment, and this time not on a rose or a daisy flower, but on a large tree. Okay. Then Rahul Sarauge, you read. He put the earphones.
He put the earphones on his head and switched on the machine. He listened for a moment to the faint, familiar humming sound. Then he picked up the axe, took a stance with his legs wide apart, and swung the axe as hard as he could at the base of the tree trunk. The blade cut deep into the wood and stuck there, and at the instant of impact, he heard a most extraordinary noise in the earphones. It was a new noise, unlike any he had heard before, a harsh, noteless, enormous noise, a growling, low pitched, screaming sound, not quick and short like the noise of the roses, but drawn out like a sob, lasting for fully a minute, loudest at the moment when the axe struck, fading gradually, fainter and fainter until it was gone.
The moment the axe made contact with the tree, he heard a sound, and it was a long drawn out sound. They say a loud sound which eventually faded, and the kind of sound he had never heard before. Continue.
Klausner stared in horror at the place where the blade of the axe had sunk into the wood flesh of the tree. Then gently he took the axe handle, worked the blade loose, and threw the thing on the ground. With his fingers, he touched the gash that the axe had made in the wood, touching the edges of the gash, trying to press them together to close the wound. And he kept saying, "Tree, oh tree, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but it will heal fine."
So he apologizes to the tree. This tells us that he has a human side. He suddenly realizes that he has hurt a tree, and so he asks for forgiveness. Continue.
For a while, he stood there with his hands upon the trunk of the great tree. Then suddenly he turned away and hurried off out of the park, across the road, through the front gate and back into his house. He went to the telephone, consulted the book, dialed a number, and waited. He held the receiver tightly in his left hand and tapped the table impatiently with his right. He heard the telephone buzzing at the other end, and then the click of a lifted receiver and a man's voice, a sleepy voice saying, "Hello, yes."
So he calls up his friend Dr. Scott, and now he will ask him to come over. Dr. Scott, who is an indifferent character, he will say, "Why should I come at 6 o'clock? I do not want to come." But eventually he will come because he will insist. Continue.
"Dr. Scott," he said. "Yes, speaking." "Dr. Scott, you must come at once quickly, please." "Who is it speaking?" "Klausner here, and you remember what I told you last night about my experience with sound and how I hoped I might." "Yes, yes, of course, but what's the matter? Are you ill?" "No, I'm not ill, but it's 6:30 in the morning," the doctor said, "and you call me, but you're not ill. Please come quickly. I want someone to hear it. It's driving me mad. I can't believe it." The doctor heard the frantic, almost hysterical note in the man's voice, the same note he was used to hearing in the voices of people who called up and said, "There's been an accident. Come quickly," he said slowly. You really want me to get out of bed and come over now?"
Now, doctor is thinking this kind of urgency he gets to hear when an accident takes place. और यहाँ पे क्लॉजनर को कुछ हुआ भी नहीं है, and still he is saying that the doctor should like get off the bed and straight away go and meet him.
सर पर वो
The
बुला
doctor is
क्यों
a
रहा
bit
था
puzzled.
डॉक्टर को?
वो उसको सुनाना चाहता था ये आवाज, because doctor was like his only friend, you can say, in a way. He wanted to show to him, and also because he was becoming psychologically mad, he was wanting to share this with another human being. Okay.
ठीक।
Continue page number 110.
Yes, now, at once, please. All right, then I will come. Klausner sat down beside the telephone and waited. He tried to remember what the shriek of the tree had sounded like, but he couldn't. He could remember only that it had been enormous and frightful and that it made him feel sick with horror. He tried to imagine what sort of noise a human would make if he had to stand anchored to the ground while someone deliberately swung a small sharp thing at his leg so that the blade cut in deep and wedged itself in the cut. Same sort of noise, perhaps? No, quite different. The noise of the tree was worse than any known human noise because of the frightening, toneless, throatless quality. He began to wonder about other living things, and he thought immediately of a field of wheat standing up straight and yellow and alive, with the mower going through it, cutting the stems, 500 stems a second, every second. Oh my God, what would that noise be like? 500 wheat plants screaming together, and every second another 500 being cut and screaming. And no, he thought, I do not want to go to a wheat field with my machine. I would never eat bread after that. But what about potatoes and cabbages and carrots and onions? And what about apples? Ah, no. Apples are all right. They fall off naturally when they are ripe. Apples are all right if you let them fall off instead of tearing them from the tree branch. But not vegetables. Not a potato, for example. A potato would surely shriek, so would a carrot and an onion and a cabbage.
Now he's thinking, as Klausner is waiting for his friend Dr. Scott, all these thoughts are running through his mind that from now on I will never eat a potato or a cabbage or wheat or corn, because these things are either plucked off from the ground या फिर कोई machine corn के ऊपर चलता है. And now he thinks that we are actually murdering the plants. We are murdering them, torturing them when we are plucking them off the ground or when we are cutting them. So he thinks that I will not eat them. Apples are all right because apples अपने आप गिर जाते हैं. We do not cut them. So he is going through the horrors of a person who realizes that they are committing murder at every second, at every day, in every part of the world, in every day of their life. So it is a science fiction, but it is also a story of human emotions, that how a scientist suddenly realizes that they are hurting plants and they are causing them extreme pain. He is moved by the painful sound of the tree and the flower. Okay. By the way, we are in page number 110. Okay, continue. He heard the click. Rahul, continue. He heard the click.
Awesome. He heard the click of the front gate latch and he jumped up and went out and saw a tall doctor coming down the patch, little black bag in hand. Well, the doctor said, well, what's all the trouble? Come with me, doctor. I want you to hear it. I called you because you're the only one I've told. It's over the road in the park. Will you come now? The doctor looked at him. He seemed calmer now. There was no sign of madness or hysteria. He was merely disturbed and excited. They went across the road into the park, and Klausner led the way to the great beech tree at the foot of which stood the long glass coffin box of the machine and the axe. Why did you bring it out here? The doctor asked. I wanted a tree. There aren't any big trees in the garden. And why the axe? You will see in a moment. But now, please put on these earphones and listen. Listen carefully and tell me afterwards precisely what you hear. I want to make quite sure. The doctor smiled and took the earphones and put them over his ears. Klausner bent down and flicked the switch on the panel of the machine. Then he picked up the axe and took his stance with his legs apart, ready to swing. For a moment, he paused. Can you hear anything? He said to the doctor. Can I what? Can you hear anything? Just a humming noise. Klausner stood there with the axe in his hands, trying to bring himself to swing, but the thought of the noise that the tree would make made him pause again. What are you waiting for? The doctor asked. Nothing, Klausner answered, and then he lifted the axe and swung it at the tree. As he swung, he thought he felt. He could swear he felt a movement of the ground on which he stood. He felt a slight shifting of the earth beneath his feet, as though the roots of the tree were moving underneath the soil. But it was too late to check the blow, and the axe blade struck the tree and wedged deep into the wood. At that moment, high overhead, there was a cracking sound of the wood splintering and swishing sound of leaves brushing against other leaves, and they both looked up, and the doctor cried, Watch out, run, man, quickly run. The doctor had ripped off the
What
ear.
happened here is clear. तो डॉक्टर को वो ईयरफोन लगा के वो पेड़ को अटैक करने गया. He started to he took a stance and he swung his axe and he hit the tree with an axe. Moments before he was about to hit the tree, he felt that the earth beneath him moved a bit, जैसे कि roots डर के मारे हिल रहे हैं. And then he hit the trunk of the tree with his axe, and at that moment ऊपर से एक branch टूट के गिर गया, as if वो branch protest कर रहा है. ऊपर से एक branch टूट के गिरा और डॉक्टर नीचे डर के भाग गया. तो डॉक्टर सुन नहीं पाएगा वो आवाज, क्योंकि वो डर के भाग जाएगा और वो मशीन उसके कान से खुल के गिर जाएगा. Page 112. Yes, second para. Continue, Rahul.
The doctor had ripped off the earphones and was running away fast, but Klausner stood spellbound, staring up at the great branch, 60 feet long at least, that was bending slowly downward, breaking and crackling and splintering at its thickest point, where it joined the main trunk of the tree. The branch came crashing down, and Klausner leaped aside just in time. It fell upon the machine and smashed it into pieces. Great heavens, shouted the doctor as he came running back. That was a near one. I thought it had got you. Klausner was staring at the tree. His large head was leaning to one side, and upon his smooth white face there was tense, horrified expression. Slowly, he walked up to the tree and gently he prized the blade loose from the trunk. Did you hear it? He said, turning to the doctor. His voice was barely audible. The doctor was still out of breath from the running and excitement. Hear what? In the earphones, did you hear anything when the axe struck? The doctor began to rub the back of his neck. Well, he said, as a matter of fact, he paused and frowned and bit his lower lip. No, I'm not sure. I couldn't be sure. I don't suppose I had the earphones on for more than a second after the axe struck. Yes, but what did you hear? I don't know, the doctor said. I don't know what I heard. Probably the noise of the branch breaking. He was speaking rapidly, rather irritably.
Okay, wait. तो डॉक्टर नहीं सुन पाया because he was more interested in trying to run away. So he could not hear the sound, and he says, I only heard the sound of the branch. Okay, page 113. Rahul Agarwal, you continue.
Sir. What did it sound like? Klausner leaned forward slightly, staring hard at the doctor. Exactly what did it sound like? Oh hell, the doctor said. I really don't know. I was more interested in getting out of the way. Let's leave it. Dr. Scott, what did it sound like? For God's sake, how could I tell? What with half the tree falling on me and having to run for my life? The doctor certainly seemed nervous. Klausner had sensed it now. He stood quite still, staring at the doctor, and for fully half a minute he didn't speak. The doctor moved his feet, shrugged his shoulders, and half turned to go. Well, he said, we'd better get back. Look, said the little man, and now his smooth white face became suddenly suffused with color. Look, he said, you stitch this up. He pointed to the last gasp that the axe had made in the tree trunk. You stitch this up quickly.
Gash माने wound, WOUND, wound. Now यहाँ पे ह्यूमन स्टोरी आ जाता है. क्लॉजनर इज टेलिंग द डॉक्टर कि मेरे एक्स के मारने से ट्री में जो गैश या कट हुआ है इसको तुम स्टिचिंग कर दो. जैसे इंसान का अगर हाथ या पैर कट जाए तो उसे स्टिचिंग करवाते हैं. तो क्लॉजनर टेल्स द डॉक्टर यू स्टिच इट अप. कंटिन्यू.
Don't be silly, the doctor said. I can't stitch through wood. Come on, let's get back. So you can't stitch through wood? No, of course not. Have you got any iodine in your bag? What if I have? Then paint the cut with iodine. It'll sting, but that can't be helped. Now look, the doctor said, and again he turned as if to go. Let's not be ridiculous. Let's get back to the house and then paint the cut with iodine. The
तो
doctor
आयोडीन इज लाइक डेटॉल. आयोडीन एक एंटीसेप्टिक का काम करता है. सो जैसे किसी का अगर चोट लग जाए तो हम लोग डेटॉल लगाते हैं. सो ही इज ट्रीटिंग द ट्री as if tree is like a human with emotions, and he says that paint it, apply it with iodine. It will sting, but we can't help it. So Klausner is human enough to realize that iodine लगाने से वो जलेगा. जैसे डेटॉल लगाने से जलन मारता है, so it will sting the tree, but that can't be helped. And the doctor thinks that he is a madman. Continue, last page, page 114.
The doctor hesitated. He saw Klausner's hands tightening on the handle of the axe. He decided that his only alternative was to run away fast, and he certainly wasn't going to do that. All right, he said, I'll paint it with iodine. He got his black bag, which was lying on the grass about 10 yards away, opened it, and took out a bottle of iodine and some cotton wool. He went up to the tree trunk, uncorked the bottle, tipped some of the iodine onto the cotton wool, bent down, and began to dab it into the cut. He kept one eye on Klausner, who was standing motionless with the axe in his hands, watching him. Make sure you get it right in. Yes, the doctor said. Now do the another one, the one just above it. The doctor did as he was told. There you are, he said, it's done. He straightened up and surveyed his work in a very serious manner. That should do nicely. Klausner came closer and gravely examined the two wounds. Yes, he said, nodding his huge head slowly up and down. Yes, that would do nicely. He stepped back a pace. You'll come and look at them again tomorrow? Oh, yes, the doctor said, of course. And put some more iodine on? If necessary, yes. Thank you, doctor, Klausner said, and he nodded his head again, and he dropped the axe, and all at once he smiled. A wild, excited smile, and quickly the doctor went over to him and gently he took him by the arm and said, Come on, we must go now. And suddenly they were walking away, the two of them walking silently, rather hurriedly across the park, over the road back to the house.
So here the doctor performs the treatment not out of concern, but because of fear. He thinks that Klausner has become like a madman, and I must do it, otherwise he will hit me with an axe. Secondly, there is no harm in applying the iodine. डॉक्टर का कोई नुकसान नहीं हो रहा इससे. So he is doing it just because Klausner is forcing him to do. And Klausner tells him that you must do it tomorrow also. Tomorrow you come and survey the tree once again, and if required, apply another dose of iodine. And then they walk back to the house, and Klausner suddenly smiles because Klausner realizes that his experiment had eventually failed, but he also realizes that nature wants to keep or guard this secret. And Klausner thinks that this is probably the revenge of nature, or this is probably the response of nature, and how nature tries to keep certain things to itself. So nature will not allow Klausner to reveal these secrets to other humans or to the world in general. So this is a science fiction with a touch of human element or human like concern about others' feelings.